Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a news item on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu, relevant for your GS paper 2. Bill banning commercial surrogacy passed in Lok Sabha. Now let's understand this newspaper article in great detail. We have a man and a woman. The woman is not in a position to conceive, she is not in a position to deliver the child for a variety of reasons. Then what happens? This couple, they approach another woman and they rent the womb of this woman. This is something that we call surrogacy. That means you are renting the womb of another woman and this rented womb will deliver the child, and that is what we call surrogacy. What is the process? Very simply, the egg of this woman is fertilized by the sperm of this man, and then this fertilized egg or embryo is then inserted into the womb of the surrogate mother, and for the 9 months this surrogate mother carries this embryo fertilized egg and then delivers the child. This is one simplistic explanation. Because what can also happen is that this woman may not be in a position to produce this egg, or this egg may not be fertilized by the sperm of this man. Then in that case, an anonymous donor can donate an egg, an anonymous donor can donate the sperm, and then in an outside environment, this egg can be fertilized, and then this fertilized egg can be inserted into the womb of a surrogate mother, and the child will be delivered after 9 months. This is something that we call surrogacy. And India emerged as the hub, as the capital of surrogacy in the whole world. Foreigners, non-resident Indians, they would come to India and they would rent the womb in India. Since the labor involved was very cheap in India, the women were providing their wombs at cheap rates to these couples. Ultimately, India emerged as the hub, as the capital of surrogacy in the world. But then there were concerns. Concern number 1, there was a German couple. They were not in a position to conceive. They came to India, went to Gujarat and rented the womb of a Gujarati lady. And then the child was born. But when this child was born, this child had to travel to Germany along with his parents. But Germany refused to grant travel documents to this child because this child is not a German national. Because according to the citizenship laws in Germany, only a child born to German parents on the soil of Germany can become the German national. Since this child was born outside Germany, and that too to an Indian surrogate woman, this child was not provided the German nationality and no travel documents were issued to this child. This child is also not an Indian citizen because according to Indian Citizenship Act, a child born to Indian parents or to Indian parent is an Indian. But since both the parents of this child were German nationals, as such, this child was not an Indian citizen. Then this couple, they approached Gujarat High Court. Gujarat High Court asked the government of India to provide travel documents to this child. But before the government could accept this verdict, the German authorities provided travel documents to this child, and this child traveled to Germany along with his parents. But that's not the only problem. Problem number 2, an Australian couple came to India, opted for surrogacy, and the surrogate mother delivered twins, a boy and a girl. This couple, they refused to take the girl child because they already had a girl child, and they took only the boy. And ultimately what happened to this girl child? She was neglected. There were other concerns as well. These surrogate mothers were exploited. They were not provided monetary support every now and then. That means exploitation of these surrogate mothers would also take place. On top of that, an ethical question was also raised. Some people, despite the fact that both the husband and the wife could deliver a child, that means they were not infertile couples, even then they would opt for surrogacy. Why? Because the woman was concerned about her figure. And that is why she opted for a surrogate mother, because she is also working. She can't remain at home for some months during the pregnancy period because she's very ambitious, and at the same time she does not want her figure to be altered. That is why she opted for surrogacy. Such ethical questions were raised, and now a bill has been passed by the Lok Sabha. Commercial surrogacy has been banned. Now let's understand what is mentioned in this bill one by one. Number one, commercial surrogacy is banned. That means non-resident Indians, foreigners or Indian couples who were not infertile, but they would opt for surrogacy because of various reasons, because of their work commitments, because of their figure commitments. This commercial surrogacy, where you pay the surrogate mother a significant amount of money, that is something which is banned according to this bill. Now, does that mean surrogacy in its entirety is banned? No. It's only commercial surrogacy that is banned. That means surrogacy can still take place, but in this case, there are some conditions that you have to meet. Only the childless couple, but this couple should be Indian. That means foreigners are not allowed to commission surrogacy in India. A childless couple who has been legally married for 5 years, they can opt for surrogacy. But this time the surrogate woman should be a close relative. That means you can't simply pick any woman, pay her, and then that woman can be your surrogate mother for your child. No, because commercial surrogacy is banned according to this bill. A childless Indian couple legally married for 5 years can opt for surrogacy but through a close relative. And singles or those who are in a homosexual relationship, they cannot apply for surrogacy. And the child who is born will then be deemed as a legal offspring of this childless couple. But then who is this close relative? This close relative should be a blood relative of this couple, but this close relative should also be married. This close relative must have herself given birth to a child before. She should not be an NRI. She should not be a foreigner, because foreigner or NRI can also be your close blood relative who have delivered a child previously. But this close relative who can be your surrogate mother should be a close relative, a blood relative of the couple, should be married, should not be an NRI or a foreigner, and she must have herself given birth to a child, and she can act as the surrogate mother only once in the lifetime. And if anybody indulges in commercial surrogacy, then in that case a jail term of 10 years can be prescribed, a fine of up to 10 lakh rupees can be imposed. So these are some of the details about this commercial surrogacy that has been passed, the bill that has been passed by the Lok Sabha. This bill will now go to Rajya Sabha. Once it is cleared by Rajya Sabha, then this bill will enter into force. It will become a law. But there are some problems. What are the problems? Number one, since LGBT community, their stigma has been removed recently by this section 377 deletion, because section 377 has now been deleted. So homosexuality is no longer a crime in this country. Why can't homosexuals also opt for surrogacy and they will have a child whom they can take care of during the rest of their lives? So that is one problem with this bill, because singles or homosexuals, they cannot apply for surrogacy. There is problem number two. What if there is a couple but they do not have a close relative who can act as a surrogate mother? Will that mean that this childless couple will remain childless for their entire lives? And what happens in case it is an intercaste marriage? It is an interreligious marriage where no close relative is in a position to rent her womb. In that case, this bill, if it becomes a law, it can be against intercaste relationship, against interreligious relationship as well. There is another argument. Some people say that even commercial surrogacy should be allowed. Why? Because a woman, if she is renting her womb, instead of working as a sexual worker, instead of working in agricultural farms, instead of working as household maids, why can't this woman rent her womb to childless couples? And ultimately she can be paid handsome amount of money as well. She can be given medical insurance as well. She can be in a position to earn better livelihood, and through this better livelihood she can educate her own children. She can raise the nutritional standard of her family. Why is it that commercial surrogacy altogether should be banned? Instead, commercial surrogacy should be allowed, but it should be regulated. You should regulate commercial surrogacy so that these surrogate mothers are not victimized, these surrogate mothers are not tortured, these surrogate mothers are paid their dues. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article, which says bill banning commercial surrogacy has been passed in Lok Sabha. Now let us look at another important news on page number 1. 9% growth by 2022 is must to generate more jobs, says Niti Aayog. Post 1991 reforms, liberalization, privatization, globalization, Indian economy grew manifold. So our economy touched 8% growth, 9% growth, 10% growth also in some quarters. So previously India was considered a country which has a Hindu rate of growth, where the growth rate does not cross 5%, where the growth rate is 4.5%. But then because of these reforms, India became one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and as per purchasing power parity, India is the third highest largest economy in the whole world. But even then, this period after 1991 is considered to be a period of jobless growth. That means India did grow economically, but it did not translate into large number of jobs for the Indians. So it is considered to be a period of or an era of jobless growth in India. Why? Let's look at three sectors: agriculture, manufacturing and services. It is the services sector which has resulted in the growth of GDP in this country. So our GDP is primarily driven by the service sector. But the biggest job provider normally is manufacturing sector. And it is in this manufacturing sector that we have not been in a position to generate and produce more jobs. And that is what Niti Aayog, which is India's think tank, in its report, which says strategy for New India at 75, it says that by 2022 we should touch 9% growth rate so that we are in a position to generate more jobs for our young crowd in this country. This report also talks about that civil services aspirants, or those who appear for civil services examinations such as you, the age limit should be reduced to 27. That means by 2022-23, the age limit to appear in the civil services examination should be 27 years. So now is the right and the golden time for you to clear the examination if you are beyond the age group of 27 years. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article, but we will have an elaborate discussion on this strategy for New India at 75 document in our weekly Economy This Week lectures. Let's look at another news, President's rule in Jammu and Kashmir from today. And let me tell you some factual details regarding this President's rule. Jammu and Kashmir is different from any other Indian state. In Jammu and Kashmir, first a governor's rule is imposed. What is this governor's rule? Governor's rule can be imposed in the state of Jammu and Kashmir if there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But this breakdown of constitutional machinery should be according to the constitution of Jammu and Kashmir. So if there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery in Jammu and Kashmir, for example, something that we saw recently when BJP withdrew support to the PDP government, there was a constitutional breakdown because constitution says there should be a chief minister, there should be council of ministers. When there is no government in the place, that means there is breakdown of constitutional machinery, and then governor's rule under the constitution of Jammu and Kashmir was imposed in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But the validity of this governor's rule is only 6 months. If during this 6 month period, if the situation does not change, if Jammu and Kashmir still has a breakdown of constitutional machinery, it is then that Article 356 of Indian Constitution comes into play and President's rule under Article 356 is imposed in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. That means first under Section 92 of the Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir, there will be a governor's rule for a period of 6 months. After the expiry of the 6 month period, then there will be President's rule under Article 356 of Indian Constitution. But there is one more difference. For any other Indian state, the maximum constitutional validity for a President's rule is 3 years. Beyond 3 years, President's rule cannot continue unless and until you amend the Constitution itself. But in case of Jammu and Kashmir, there is no upper limit for President's rule. Once President's rule, which entered into force in Jammu and Kashmir from midnight, once it enters into force, there is no upper limit for the continuance of President's rule in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Let's look at another news, something that we discussed day before yesterday. ISRO's angry bird takes to the skies. And what are we talking about? We are talking about GSAT-7A. India or Indian Space Research Organization has launched numerous communication satellites. But for the first time, an exclusive communication satellite has been launched for Indian Army or Indian Air Force. 70% of this GSAT-7A will cater to the needs of Indian Air Force. The remaining will cater to the needs of the Indian Army. So if there is a question asked in the examination, which of the following satellite or communication satellite is exclusively used for Indian Air Force, that is this ISRO's angry bird, what is called GSAT-7A. Now let us look at another news on page number 12, international page. US announces Syria Troop pullout. Now there is a civil war going on in Syria. And this is the product of the larger Arab Spring. So what is this Arab Spring? Arab Spring is the name given to the series of protests that erupted in the Arab world in late 2010. These protests were against dictatorship, against inflation, against joblessness, against corruption, against human rights violations, against dictatorship, so on and so forth. And this Arab Spring began in Tunisia. And then slowly and steadily it spread to different parts of the Middle East. What was the impact? The impact was that in Tunisia, the government of Zainul Abidin bin Ali was ousted and the government was overthrown. This Arab Spring then traveled to Egypt and the president of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, was arrested and his government was overthrown. It traveled to Libya, where the Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi, he was killed by the mob and then his government automatically was also overthrown. It traveled to Yemen, where President Ali Abdullah Saleh, he was ousted and the power was given to a national unity government. It also traveled to Syria, but in Syria, it did not result in the overthrow of the government. And it led to a peculiar situation in Syria. What is this peculiar situation? There is President Bashar al-Assad. He heads the Syrian government. Then there is opposition. And this opposition is supported by Turkey. Turkey, predominantly Sunni. Bashar al-Assad comes from an Alawite sect, which is basically a small sect in Shia Islam. Then we have militants from Islamic State, ISIS. Then we have an opposition, another opposition called Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF. It is supported by United States. And if you look at, there is a unique power play involved in Syrian war. Assad government is supported by Iran because Iran is also Shia dominated. It is supported by Russia. This is also supported by Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization basically. Opposition is supported by Qatar. Islamic State is a terrorist organization headed by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who shocked the world when in 2013 2014 he claimed that he is the Caliph of Islam, wherein he claimed that he is the leader of all the Muslims anywhere and everywhere in the world. And then we have Syrian Democratic Forces, supported primarily by United States, supported by France, supported by Australia, Germany, Netherlands, so on and so forth. And then United States, what it did, United States is supporting SDF, but it is against ISIS. It is also against Bashar al-Assad. That means the uniqueness of this Syrian civil war is such that they are fighting against each other. They are fighting against a common enemy as well. In Syria, there are close to 2,000 US troops who are there to support SDF, who are there to fight a war against Islamic State as well as against the Bashar al-Assad government. But now what Donald Trump has said, he has said that we are going to withdraw from Syria because our principal objective was to defeat the Islamic State. And now since we have defeated the Islamic State, we don't have to remain stationed in Syria. We are going to pull out our troops from Syria. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Let us look at the last page of today's Delhi edition of the Hindu. A newly discovered blind amphibian from Panama will be named after Donald Trump. Why? Because Donald Trump is blind to climate change. Donald Trump does not believe in the climate change. In fact, he announced that United States will pull out of the Paris Climate Change Conference. And that is what this newspaper article is all about. A newly discovered blind amphibian will be called Dermophis Donald Trumpi. This amphibian has no legs and has poor eyesight. Now let us look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper, beginning with Rights Revised. We discussed day before yesterday about the Transgenders Bill that was passed by Lok Sabha. This editorial says that Lok Sabha has passed a new bill to protect the transgender persons, but there are some concerns which remain. And we have discussed most of these concerns in our analysis that day, but let me recap it for you. Number one, Supreme Court in 2014 verdict in Nalsa judgment. Supreme Court had said that members of the transgender community should be provided affirmative action policy. That means they should be considered backward classes, and reservation in government jobs and reservation in educational institutions should be provided to them. But this bill is silent on reservation. That's one problem with this bill. Second, Supreme Court had said that self-determination of one's identity is one of the most important fundamental rights under Article 21 of Indian Constitution. But instead of self-identifying themselves, these transgenders would be screened by a committee, and then a certificate will be issued to them that they do belong to a transgender community. That is another problem with this bill. But the Hindu says that although this requirement that you have to go through district screening committee, it is very important to prevent the misuse of transgender provision, but self-determination is missing. Self-identification of one's gender is missing from this bill. That is why there is a problem with this bill. Let's say, for example, there is a transgender person in the family. This transgender person is facing enormous difficulty in his family, facing criticism inside the family, discrimination inside the family. It would have been better if this transgender is removed from his family and he is placed in an environment where other transgenders are also present, so that this transgender can be comfortable in this family of new transgenders. But there is a bar that you cannot forcibly evict a transgender from his family, separate a transgender from his family. And unless and until there is a court order, you cannot separate a transgender from his family. The Hindu says that this should be removed. That means transgender should be removed from his family, separated from his family, because family is the principal source of discrimination against these transgenders. Although this bill says that this applies only to minors, that means only the children, minors less than the age of 18, they cannot be forcibly separated from their families. But Hindu editorial says even the minor children who are victimized agonized by their family members. They should be separated from their family so that they can better lead their lives away from their family with their new family consisting of transgender people. That's another problem. Fourth problem, begging. That's the another concern with this bill. This bill criminalizes begging, and it is an offense if someone is compelling a transgender to beg. Somebody is forcing a transgender to beg. Somebody is enticing a transgender to beg. But the editorial says if begging itself is no longer an offense, why are you snatching the livelihood of a transgender community? Because in one case you are not giving them reservation. In another case, if they support their families or if they get their livelihood through begging, why are you criminalizing that? That's another problem with this bill. Dr. Shashi Tharoor has few other concerns about this transgender bill, something which is not mentioned in the Hindu editorial. Number one, Dr. Shashi Tharoor says there should have been an amendment in this bill so that schools and colleges, their syllabus should be amended in such a manner that our students will need to learn about LGBT community. What are their rights? So that teachers are trained to ensure that transgenders are not discriminated, so that gender non-conforming children are not discriminated against. That is one thing Dr. Shashi Tharoor argues should have been mentioned in this bill. Second, there are many offenses under Indian Penal Code such as rape, stalking, sexual harassment. These are applicable only if the victim is a female. Therefore, there is an urgent need that this bill should have been amended or IPC should have been amended to include transgender persons also within the ambit of Indian Penal Code. So that is something that is missing in this bill, and these are the criticisms against this bill that you can cite in your answer if a question about the critical analysis of this bill is asked in your mains examination. Now let us look at another column on page number 9. We are not mere subjects of the state, written by Apurva Anand, who teaches at the Delhi University. It talks about an individual. It talks about the state. It talks about the society. And it raises a very important question: who is superior? Is an individual superior, or is the state superior, or is the society superior? This article, which is very important for your essay, it says that an individual is superior because individual gives legitimacy to the state. Individuals combined together creates a society. So it is the individual who is more superior than the state and society. So individual should have the power to criticize the state. Individual should have the power to criticize the society. Individual should have the power to disobey the state as well if the state is passing laws which are unethical or discriminatory in nature. There are some very important quotes in this column, for example by Mahatma Gandhi, for example B.R. Ambedkar, that you can cite in your essay. For example, Mahatma Gandhi said that it is individual who is more superior to the state because the state is soulless and the individual has a soul. So it is the individual which is more superior. In the same manner, B.R. Ambedkar said that individual not only is above the state, but individual is also above the society. The aim and object of society is the growth of an individual, is the development of the personality. Society is not about the individual. So this column basically says that there will always be a tension between the state and an individual. A democratic state is not where citizens give up their freedom. A democratic state is one where citizens have the freedom to criticize the law, to disobey the law if these laws are violating their dignity and goodness. That is what this column is basically all about. Because the context of this column is the statement given by Maharashtra government before the Supreme Court, wherein Maharashtra government said it has become a fashion of the day to make a hue and cry about personal liberty. But it is this personal liberty which makes up an individual. And it is this personal liberty which Supreme Court said is an intrinsic part of your privacy, which is a fundamental right under Article 21 of Indian Constitution. It's a beautifully written column. If you have time, please go through this. It can be of immense benefit for your essay writing. Now let's look at another column on page number 9 written by Neeta Khilnani. When Clean Ganga project was launched, the objective was Aviral Dhara. That means the Ganga should have uninterrupted flow of water. The objective was also Nirmal Dhara. That means this flow, not only should it be uninterrupted, it should also be unpolluted. But this column says we have neglected uninterrupted flow, we have neglected unpolluted flow, and all we are talking about is clean Ganga. That means our focus is only on cleaning the ghats of Ganga, setting up STPs, sewage treatment plants around the Ganga. But what we are not focusing on, that the flow to this Ganga should not only be uninterrupted, it should be unpolluted as well. Recently, the government released norms that there should be some percentage of flow that should be forever inside the river Ganga. For example, during November, March, during the dry season, 20% of the monthly average flow has to be maintained. That should be the flow of water into river Ganga. In other cases, it should be 30%. But what this column talks about, it says that this 20% recommendation is less than the scientific recommendation of 50%. 50% of monthly average flow should have been maintained in river Ganga. And on top of that, what we are doing, more and more hydropower projects are coming up. When more and more hydropower projects are coming up, that means the flow of water into river Ganga will be interrupted. And uninterrupted water should have flown into river Ganga. This should have been unpolluted water as well. That is how we can save river Ganga. We cannot save river Ganga by merely cleaning the Ganga or setting up sewage treatment plants, but we should have to ensure that there should be uninterrupted and unpolluted flow of water into river Ganga. And for that, we need to rethink on the large number of power projects that are coming up along the Ganga. Meeta Khilnani says, unless we question these projects now, we will not be in a position to save the river Ganga, which is the lifeline of the millions of people in this country. Now let's look at another column, Befriend Thy Neighbor. It talks about India and China. This column, written by Uday Balkrishnan, wonders what led to the Chinese emergence as a big superpower on this planet. China is superior today economically, politically, militarily as well, and it is considered to be one of the biggest superpowers in the world and directly competing with United States in influence. But if we compare India and China were comparatively common and similar by the mid 1980s. So what changed after that? That China has now outgrown India to emerge as one of the biggest superpowers on this planet. This column says it is China's insistence on science and technology. It's China's insistence on research. It's China's insistence on cultural capital. And it is this cultural capital, this investment in science and technology, in education, in research that is fueling the Chinese growth. And there is a lesson for India. So what India should do, if science and technology is powering China's growth, we should make sense of those by setting up well-funded, world-class, that to interdisciplinary centers in India. And that is how we can match China. That is how we can also grow as a nation. That is what this column is all about. Let's look at some of the prelims based questions. Syria lies on the east coast of which of the below mentioned sea? Mediterranean Sea. This is Syria and this is the Mediterranean Sea. Map based question, which of the local winds are correctly matched? Khamsin, it's Africa. Chinook, North America, yes. Mistral, France, yes. Harmattan, Central Asia, but it is Africa. So the correct answer is 2 and 3, C. Let's look at the explanation. Harmattan, West Africa. Chinook, North America. Khamsin, North Africa. Mistral, France. And this is the map. Chinook, Harmattan, Mistral, Khamsin. Previous year's prelims based question 2017, which of the following are envisaged by right against exploitation in the Constitution of India? Right against exploitation talks about two articles, 23 and 24. 23 talks about prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor. 24 talks about prohibition of employment of children in factories and mines. So the correct answer is 1 and 4. C. Now let us look at a mains based question. Answer should be in less than 150 words. I picked this question from UPSC GS paper 2. Under what circumstances can financial emergency be proclaimed by the President of India? What are the consequences that follow? So there are two parts to this question. Number one, under Article 360 of Indian Constitution, financial emergency can be proclaimed by the President of India on the advice of the Cabinet if the President feels that the financial stability or the credit of the nation is under threat. Once it is proclaimed, then financial emergency needs to be approved by both houses of the Parliament within 2 months. And for its approval, simple majority is required in the Parliament. Once it is approved, financial emergency remains in force unless and until it is revoked by the President of India. That means national emergency remains in force for 6 months. Then after 6 months, it needs to be reapproved by the Parliament. Then it can be imposed for another period of 6 months. Then after 6 months, it is to be reapproved by the Parliament. That means there is periodic approval of the Parliament required for the continuation of national emergency. President's rule can continue only for 3 years maximum. But there is no upper limit for financial emergency. Once it is approved by the President, it continues unless and until it is revoked by the President of India. But what are the consequences? Till date, financial emergency has never been imposed in this country. So what exactly happens in financial emergency, we may not know in its entirety. But there are some things we can assume can happen when financial emergency is imposed. What can happen? Number one, the salaries of government employees, constitutional functionaries can be reduced. Second, all the money bills passed by various state legislatures can be reserved for the consideration of the president. Unless and until president approves those money bills cannot be passed. Similarly, all the resources, whether they deal with the states or with the center, they are kept at the disposal of the president. That means the central government. So that every opportunity, every resource is effectively utilized to counter this financial emergency which has arisen. What can happen in financial emergency? The distribution of tax revenue or the recommendations of the Finance Commission can also be altered or can also be suspended to meet the requirements of the time that has resulted in the imposition of financial emergency. That is what you will have to answer in your question. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.